Niobe, hello, and thank you so much for doing this chat for the London Mountain Film Festival. We've
Hi,
got,
Liv. I'm really happy to be with you here.
thank you, and we've got two time zones here. I'm in the Chilterns in the UK, and you're in Canada. I mean, that's where you're from, but whereabouts in Canada are you?
Well, I'm as far west as you can get in Canada. I'm on Vancouver Island. So it's this beautiful Pacific Northwest climate with temperate rainforests. It's a really nice part of the country, and we get spring before anyone else. So the rest of Canada is frozen.
I bet, and you can hear that beautiful bird song in the background there with you. So it seems like a wonderful, wonderful spot. But congratulations on your film, The Long Today. I thought it was beautiful, and I thought it was incredibly emotional because my father's the same age as your father in the film. So, I mean, I just think congratulations. It must have been such a moving, powerful film to make for you.
Well, it was. In a way, this is my most personal film. I've been making films for 15 years, and I'm a social anthropologist, and a lot of our films are about things that I find fascinating, like human evolution and ancient human migrations and medical science. But this was a much different project for me, in the sense that I opened my own family up to the camera, which I'd never done before, and I also intentionally made it a personal testimony. It's driven by my voice, and it really is a subjective um, uh, capsule of my relationship with my dad. And I think that that's I have to say it's a courageous thing to do, and that's why I hadn't done it for a long time.
I bet. And The Long Today, so it's about this river canoe trip you take with your father for his 70th birthday. And I mean, it's stunning. But what I found really interesting and different from adventure films is that you, as you say, you narrate it almost like a letter to your father about how much he means to you and your nostalgia for these trips that you used to take together through the summer. But can you tell me a little bit more about why you chose to make it now?
Well, um, I've been tripping with my parents all my life. So I'm now 47. And since I was born, we've been going up to these rivers and lake systems in northern Canada and going on this annual 2 week canoe trip. And I think that, you know, if you're lucky enough to be like me, born into paddling or climbing or skiing, you've had this partnership built into your life. You're born into the life of adventuring in wild places, and you've got this partner. And that's my parents, and especially my dad, because my dad has always been physically the same as me. He's the same height, the same dimensions. He's got the same interests, and we've been partners in the bush. And so I think that that's a great privilege, but it's also like you have a time machine in your hands, because in my case, I could see my dad suddenly get older, and I could see that his age was beginning to change how he experienced those rivers. I could see uh, suddenly a physical decline when he was always just my partner and always 100% as strong as me. And so I felt suddenly that I needed to indulge in this conceit of making a film that captures a moment in time when we're still just partners on the river, right? Um, and that's what a film does. It freezes a moment in time. Um, but it also, this film, as you say, I narrated as a personal testimony. I wanted to be very transparent about my fears. I mean, my fears of losing my dad, of him getting older and not being able to paddle the routes with me in the same way anymore. About my fears that the same thing will happen to me someday. I mean, we do these trips as a family, and I have teenage daughters, so we're seeing our teenage daughters get stronger and more confident, and they're becoming better canoeists. And at the same time, I'm looking at my parents and seeing them get slower and more fragile. And so you're kind of forced by this repetitive act of going back to the same trip with your family every year to confront the passage of time. And so the film is just this trick that, of course, isn't going to work, of freezing this moment, this precious moment that we've got now, where my dad is still my partner.
Oh, I can see that. And it's very much about being in the present, isn't it? And kind of almost, um, treasuring those golden times, and
Yeah.
not thinking about, trying to not think about the future all the time, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I think that there is this mental thing that goes on when you gather together for the annual trip, where you're repeating something. You're in the same clothes. You're in the same canoes. You're eating it out of the same food box that's as old, in my case, as me, and it's like nothing has changed. It's a wonderful time of the year, when we come back in that annual circle of life to that place. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of it's a very nostalgic film in a way. Uh, and we actually start the film with a device. We shot the first few minutes, the intro sequence of the film, on Super 8 film, just to kind of trigger the audience subconsciously that we're going to be dealing in nostalgia with this film. And the thing about nostalgia is that moment when you feel like you're truly happy, when life is really working out, and you're in a wonderful moment, you're immediately nostalgic for that moment. Like, you're nostalgic in the moment for what's happening to you. It's the strangest thing, but there's a sense of remember this time, right? And I think that's what we were trying to do with the film.
Wonderful. I want to come back to those kind of playful moments as well at the beginning of the film in a second. But in terms of the actual trip, then, you've got some stunning shots, particularly drone shots of the winding Waterman River in Saskatchewan in Canada.
Yeah.
I don't think many people in the UK know that region at all of Canada. It looks incredibly beautiful, but is it really wild? I mean, how long was it very difficult to get to the starting point of that route?
Well, if the audience in the UK knows anything about Saskatchewan, they probably know about the wheat fields. I mean, it's known as this flat, grain-growing province on the prairies of Canada. But in fact, two-thirds of it is bush, and it's Canadian Shield, which is this Precambrian rock landscape that um, uh, forces rivers to drop from lake to lake and pool to pool. And there's a lot of relief. So it's rugged country. Unlike other parts of Canada, it has not been settled and made into agricultural land. So it's still, where First Nations exclusively live, and there are almost no roads up there. So it is just heaven for wilderness canoe tripping. The water is fairly warm, but the technical nature of the rapids is pretty challenging on many of those rivers, and you've got to fly in. So you drive as far as you can drive, and then you strap your canoes onto a float plane and you fly. And the float planes, you literally just point to a lake on the map before you leave the float plane base and say, drop us here. You drop in and you start paddling. The Waterman River is one of the more remote rivers in that region. And so we had to fly, I forget exactly how far it was as the crow flies, but it was a few hundred miles. And then 2 weeks later, we hit a mining road and we're able to come out on that mining road.
Gosh, wow. So you say it was 2 weeks then, the trip. And I mean that's quite a long time, isn't it, to just be, carrying everything yourselves, and you have to carry your canoes in between waterways,
Yeah.
and you've got all the rapids. So you're obviously out for two weeks. How far in terms of the journey of the canoe of the river did you manage to get across in 2 weeks?
Well, in miles, the route was about just over 200 miles, and for a 2 week trip, that's a totally doable distance, particularly if there's some current in the river. But the Waterman's a strange one. It's a river that people know about who go up there, but which never gets paddled. No one ever paddles it. I mean, they get a trip every 5 or 10 years. And so there is a single trip report, which we refer to in the film, written in the early 90s. But there's no sign that humans are traveling this river. And like in principle, it's a river. I mean, it's a ribbon of water and it flows, and there's a start and an end on the map. but in practice, it's just the messiest, confused, high gradient, low volume piece of water you can imagine. So you can't really run the Waterman in the conventional sense. I mean, there's never an opportunity to really set up for a showcase rapid and run it in a technically fluent way. Instead, it's just this get bashed down the river, right? And then, of course, in our film, there's the added layer that we go with this 50-year-old canoe that my dad built when I was born, this wood canvas canoe, which is, it's literally an antique in Canada. It's a beautiful canoe, but quite fragile. And so to get down the river, we had to do it in a way that you wouldn't normally do it in an indestructible modern canoe. We literally had to swim the canoe down the rapids. And there's this one moment you see in the opening of the film, and then we come back to it, where my dad and I tip, and we're fully loaded, and the canoe goes down the rapid and hits a rock and turns over, and you see me jumping out of the stern at the top of the rapid.
Yeah.
Well, you wouldn't normally do that, but every time we thought the canoe was in danger, we would jump out of the canoe into the rapid, like no matter what was there, because we realized that if our weight was in the canoe and it hit a big rock, that would be the end. We're 100 miles away from the closest road.
Oh gosh, blimey. I mean, so the trip, obviously, so it probably sounds a bit harder than you anticipated then, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I started by saying that 200 odd miles is not a terrible distance for a 2-week canoe trip. But in fact, right off the bat, we were doing 2-3 mile days.
Wow.
So we were literally wading and swimming and clearing with axes, clearing our way. It's called creeking. It's not running a river, it's creeking. And you can see some shots where we had to literally cut trees out of our way to get through. So it was really slow going to start. And we were quite worried we wouldn't make the takeout in time. And we're trying to figure out what to do. I mean, is there a way we could get a plane in, but there was no place to land? Would we just have to ration our food and extend the trip? We didn't know what to do. And then the anxiety around, will this canoe make it to the bottom?
Oh God. Yeah, I mean, it did look like there were a lot of difficulties, but also a lot of fun, and it must have been an incredibly bonding experience. And the film just shows that bond that you have with your father. And I just wanted to go back to that sort of the message of the film. And do you think that by sort of going through all of these emotions, and talking about them, about your father, do you think that it kind of helped you reconcile these feelings? Do you think it sort of helped you process them?
I think so. It's taken almost 2 years since we went on that trip to come to that, but I think there was this dawning realization that my dad was getting older and he was changing, and he wasn't the partner in the bush that he always had been. But I was reluctant to talk about it. We couldn't talk about it. We couldn't talk about change and age. It's like as soon as you voice it, it's real. And this film was a way of ripping off the bandage and confronting it. And I think one of the hardest things about making the film, editing the film, was writing the lines. I can see my dad is changing. I can see that there's a physical decline. I mean, I felt terrible saying that. Of course I knew my dad would see the film, but at the same time I think it needed to be said, and now we're all more open. And there's a practical aspect to that, because we want to keep on tripping until we just can't do it anymore, but we can't trip in the same way we always have. And so we need to kind of confront these changes, and this film has helped us do that. And yeah, it kind of feels liberating to just say to the world, I'm afraid of losing my dad, and I'm afraid of getting older. I mean, everyone is, but not everyone says it.
Absolutely. And can I ask you, what did your dad think of the film when he did watch it? Because I mean, there's some great shots in there of him. Is brilliant, but also, it must have been quite difficult in a way for him to watch it in some way.
Well, my dad is just not he's just not precious about his image, and he really loved the film. He as I say in the film, my dad lives in the moment, right? And so the first time he saw the film was in front of an audience of friends and family, about 100 people. We set up socially distanced in their yard with a canoe, with a paddle length between each group.
Wow.
And that was the first time he saw the film. And I was nervous about what he'd think. I was also nervous about what my mom would think, because my mom has always come on these trips and she wasn't on this trip. And, I was nervous that she felt like she was getting written out of our family history. But he just loved it and he laughed. And, I think maybe that's because we managed to find those fun moments. It was a hard trip, but it was never grim. Like we were always having a good time, and we were always laughing at ourselves. And the harder it got, the more fun it was. That's just the way we are. So I think that we managed to channel enough of that emotion, and I think that's why it's a fun film to watch.
Exactly. I was going to say it's very emotional, but there's all these playful elements of it, particularly at the beginning, where I think it must be is it your two daughters that dive off into the lake and they say they're not coming, and I loved all of that. And that was really fun. You've got the mixture of kind of laughter, bickering, fun, escapism. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what family adventures are about, right?
Yeah, completely, absolutely. And I have to say, there's a little detail here. So, spoiler alert, but there's a shot of my dad in the nude, gunnel bobbing a canoe, right? And it's one of the tricks he does. It's a side shot, so don't worry, it's not obscene. And this shot has made it into the show reels of several mountain film festivals, right? So now this one shot alone is all over the internet. And I asked my dad a while ago how he feels about that, and he's just so proud that he can show off his 70-year-old body to the world like that.
That's brilliant. Oh man. So obviously this film was filmed before the pandemic, and I think that's why it made it more poignant, because many of us haven't been able to be with our families as much over the past year as we would hope. Um, but I think did it, I suppose, what do you want the audience to get out of this film? Is it that you sort of treasure these moments with family, or what do you think you wanted to convey to people?
Well, a whole bunch of different things. It's hard to give you a capsule answer to that question. Um, but we didn't know there was a pandemic coming when we made the film. We didn't know that everyone would be locked away and suddenly desperately missing their families. So, I think the most valuable thing that the film says was something we never planned it to say, which is, grab that time, take that time. These precious moments are fleeting, and when you're having them, you might think that they'll go on forever, but they won't. So, I do believe that in our case, and in most people's cases, the most precious relationships they have are with their close family. And yet we live these busy lives when we're not seeing each other as much as we will wish we had when we're old. So grab the moment, and when we all get vaccinated, go out there and have an adventure with your parents if you've still got them.
Absolutely. Well, that adventure looked pretty fantastic. And is that the Wotherman River? Is that where you would usually go in past summers, or was it different parts of Saskatchewan that you would, go on these trips?
We paddle all over northern Canada. I mean, I'm a skier and climber, and I do all kinds of things. But the paddling is what we do as a family, multi-generational family. And we always go to northern Canada, and we try to paddle in the Canadian Shield. The Canadian Shield is just like elegiacally beautiful country, and it's perfect for this kind of long distance paddling adventure. The Wathaman was kind of a crazy one. I don't think we'll do it again, but it was a perfect backdrop for this crazy film. But we are already planning another trip. We're taking two other families, so 6 teenage girls on a trip not too far away from the Wathaman, on a river that I know very well. I used to guide on it. So we'll be going back again this summer.
Oh, brilliant. That sounds fantastic. And
Yeah.
if you had tips for people who want to go and do a paddle trip, I mean, what would the top lines be?
Well, one thing I'd say about wilderness paddling is it's perfect for families because everyone moves at the same speed. You're in the canoe with someone else. So it's a great thing to do as a family or as a group of stronger and weaker trippers. Uh, it's it's actually um, not as difficult to reach those areas as it might look in the film. If you find an outfitter who can rent canoes and gear, and you can find a float plane base, and there are many float plane bases throughout northern Canada, you can do it. You get the topographical maps and you go on the trip. But at the same time, it does take a level of experience. And if you're not an experienced tripper, it's best to go with a guide or to do a course beforehand. I mean, you're out there in a completely remote setting, and if you get into trouble, you're on your own. I in all the years of tripping, we haven't had many accidents, but we've had a few where we've had to be evacuated out, and it's difficult. So um, it seems easy to me because I've been doing it since I was born. But if you're just starting out as a tripper, you want some professional help.
Good point. Good point. Well, I think the film is going to get so many people dreaming about trips to northern Canada. So, I mean, I think you've definitely conveyed that, and I think people will get such a great message from the film, and such a poignant time for everybody. So, Niobe, thank you so much for this chat. We're going to have to wrap it up, but it's been really wonderful to chat to you. And congratulations again on the long today, and for the London Mountain Film Festival.
Thank you, Liv. It was a real pleasure to talk to you. And hello, everyone out there at the London Mountain Film Festival. I hope you enjoy the film.